year. Why the heck am I saying that? Well, this was supposed to be a Happy New Year video at the turn of 2025, and it's almost March now, so it's not a new year, and it's not happy, I'd say, at the moment, but it is year, so here we are. Your question box video is finally here. This is something that we talked about doing in 2024's New Year's video. It was one of the suggestions that came in for improvements to the channel or something along those lines. And I really like the idea. I'm just really sorry that it took this long to come to fruition. If you've been on the community page or been on Blue Sky, you've seen that basically since the day after the ball dropped here in the States, our family has just been rotating sicknesses around and have been sick. And so here I am on the road after having flown this morning in a hotel room, ready to finally do this with you guys, which I'm excited for, but I'm sorry that this is the improvement. But seriously, thank you, as always, to the community for your patience for the video, and especially the people who actually ask questions and put them in the question box. Thank you for your patience, because I know it has been like 2 months, I think, since I opened up that forum, and we're finally getting to do this. So hopefully you're still around and actually paying attention to the channel to see the responses. But I'm excited. I'm always happy. This is like my favorite part of the YouTube experience, is hanging out with you all and actually having a two-way discussion in the best way that we can in this medium. So I'm excited to see what questions you have. I've only barely glanced through a few of them just to make sure there's like weed out the things that are weird or strange or didn't make sense. And there weren't that many this time around. So I really haven't looked too deeply at any of them. So hopefully you're getting like the most fresh answer you can and perspective you can from me. So let's get right into it. And by the way, in case you missed the original prompt, this is pretty much anything goes. Ask me anything that's not under NDA. Otherwise, I didn't really put any constraints on it. I fully expect there'll be questions about malware stuff, maybe video game hacking stuff, channel stuff, maybe just completely off the wall stuff. So we'll see what we get into. First question, how to transition from RE simple C programs and CTFs to actual softwares? And this comes in anonymously. Great question. So how do we transition from reverse engineering the kind of problems you see in capture the flag events, or like little crack me's, that even the ones that I posted that have been relatively simple, I think, for anyone beginning and intermediate in the field. How do we go from that to actually reverse engineering software? Really good question. And I think that's the question that everyone who tries and attempts to get in this field tries to answer. What I would say is there's really no switch that flips at some point when you're learning, especially not with a complex domain like reverse engineering. There's no day that you wake up and you feel ready and confident to dive in and reverse, anything. It's more that you just have to do it. And I think that's such a cop-out answer. It sounds like such a cop-out answer coming out of my mouth, but that's really all there is to it. What I would say is that what helped me a lot when I made the leaps from, working on crack me's or working on, at the time, like school assignments, stuff like that, to actually looking at real software. And even today, when I go in and try to solve a reverse engineering problem or start on the adventure of disassembling and trying to understand a whole program, is you have to start very, very, very small. And what I mean by that is don't try to boil the ocean and try to reverse, every single piece of functionality about a piece of software as you go in and just like load up in your disassembler, because you'll get overwhelmed. It happens to everyone who does this. You just get overwhelmed at the amount of data in front of you. So instead, pick a program that you're familiar with, especially when you're first starting out. You'll notice that I do this like in the video game hacking series we do, whether it's, off the cuff, like in Disassembly in the Dark, or even in the plan videos where you kind of see the product of the reverse engineering research, is that I start with, I just want to change this one thing, or I want to find out how this one thing works. That could be a timer. That could be a health functionality in a game or something like that. Some tangible atomic thing that you can kind of focus your energy on and focus just on getting there. And then you can move on to the next thing once you find out more about that thing. And what I found is that as I'm looking to solve whatever that initial small problem is, you end up learning a lot of interesting things along the way. I think the roller coaster tycoon video, the second one, maybe the first one a little bit, but definitely the second one, exemplifies this a lot. Like, I started with a vision that I wanted to achieve. I started with the small steps of that vision. And then along the way, I kind of got answers to the questions I had, as well as a bunch of answers to questions I didn't know I had about how the game worked. And I learned a ton from that experience because of that. So I would say if you want to transition from smaller challenges to reverse engineering real software, you really just have to dive in. I would recommend you pick a program that you're familiar with so that you know kind of what right looks like when you run it, and you kind of know the mechanics of the program, and then just try to focus on one of those mechanics, or even better, one little piece of those mechanics, so that you can set yourself up for success and not for disappointment because you can't figure out, this complex piece of software off the bat, which is not going to happen. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. So much easier just to start small. That's what I would say about that. I have to roll my sleeves up because it's getting warm in here because I turned the fan off because it was so loud. Next question. How do you think the industry fails to keep talent interested? Think analysts on the first line to the RE of malware. What do you think in general that the titles in the industry has done? I personally think it has diluted the meaning and everyone is a specialist at this point. Is there anything you would nuke from orbit if you had the chance? And this is this is a question from Horse. So first of all, impressive typing from a horse. Second of all, very good question in all seriousness. Questions, I should say. There's a few things to unpack here, so let me think about this for a second. I thought too long and the camera died, so sorry if the positioning is a little bit off from what you were just saying. On the topic of how do you think the industry fails to keep talent interested? I mean, I think that really depends on a lot of factors. I think it depends a lot on, I guess I just don't know what you mean by industry, like the cybersecurity industry. If so, like, I think it varies across the companies you work at. What I have seen is when people get disinterested as far as just working in the SOC or working on malware analysis, it's because of fatigue of something. Most of the time, it's a fatigue of trying to keep doing cool stuff and learning new things, but balancing that with your actual job duties and the business needs, especially in businesses where security is not your bottom line. Which is most places. When you work in security, you're working for a business whose primary business is something way different than reverse engineering malware. It's probably selling something to someone else. And sometimes you get to this point where the work you're doing is the less sexy side of security, and you don't get as much time to focus on those cool areas that you fell in love working in. And there's a balance here. Like, obviously there's stuff we have to do as part of our jobs that's not going to be fun. But I think it's also very, very important that employers give you that little space to experiment and explore and learn new things and keep up your skills in such a complex and in-depth and broad field of security, especially with malware analysis. So when it comes to like failing to keep talent interested, it's usually when I've seen, good talent move on to new things, it's because they're not feeling challenged enough, or they're not getting enough time to experiment and, toy around with ideas and learn and keep growing and learning. And sometimes that's the employer who needs to start, keeping people trained and engaged and giving them opportunities to experiment and keep their brains growing and wrinkling. And other times you might just reach the peak of that role and you're ready to move on to something new, and that's all right too. As far as titles in the industry, yeah, I agree with this to some extent. I don't know. Titles to me have never really meant much because from just in my career experience, like, someone's title never defined what they were to me. It was always about when I spoke with them, kind of the impression they gave, what they were able to do, what they were able to accomplish, how they communicated. Told me everything I needed to know about them. I was also in the military, so believe me when I say title and rank play very little role in my impression of you. But yeah, I would just say be skeptical of anyone's title. Base it on what they're saying and what they do, not what their title is in general. I think that's good advice to follow. Specialist, I guess, is a good example because in a lot of companies I worked at, specialist is like a lower ranking role. In some companies, it might be like the highest role, I guess. And in the military, it's kind of both. somehow. They somehow run the show, but they're generally average or worse. But yeah, I think in general it's healthy to have a skepticism of title and just base your impression on what people say and do. Anything I would nuke from orbit if I had the chance? Well, since you didn't put any qualifiers on there, I would say terminal diseases, especially in children, and any mental disease or long-running debilitating disease like dementia, Alzheimer's, or MS or something like that, that slowly and painfully puts people through hell. That's what I would say. Of course, if you actually nuked those things from orbit, you'd probably cause a lot of radiation and lead directly to those things. And suddenly, are we the baddies? Next question. Do you consider creating a Discord server for the community? Parentheses, please do it. And this is from Orion EXE. I knew it was going to be from you because I think you asked this last year and I love you for it. I am a part of several different Discord servers for various purposes. Some of them are for other creators and some of them are really good. And by good, I mean they're vibrant. There's lots of discussion happening. There's channels for all kinds of topics and people would genuinely find help or just community there. And some are just kind of there. They just have a presence and every now and then there's someone who pops in and says hi, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't find myself gravitating towards that kind of server more because I'm on Discord or I'm spending my time on that kind of media to engage with people. And right now, I just don't know if this channel is quite there yet in terms of engagement and the size of the community. You all can comment and let me know if I'm wrong. If you're really interested, let me know because I'm happy to host a server like that. I'm just afraid of creating another dead zone that takes up a place in somebody's list of Discord servers and other chat channels where people just don't really make a priority to go in there and post stuff. But if there is interest, let me know and we can look into it. I'm more than happy to. Again, I love engaging with you all, whether it's through comments, through DMs, through messages on other platforms. So I'm all for it. I just want to make sure that we're using the right media to do that kind of conversing in. All right, next question from either Cubicle or Cubicle. Either way, I really like that name. What resources are there for reversing more advanced C++ applications, templates, multi-inheritance, polymorphism? Oh my, really good question. It does change things up a bit when you go from reversing C programs to C++ programs, just a little bit because the structures are a little different. There's a few new things. Things look a little bit different in the disassembly if you're not used to seeing them, and you kind of have to account for all the things you just listed out. So you're clearly familiar with kind of the differences between traditional C applications and C++ applications. As far as resources for reversing them, I wish I had a better answer, but honestly, when it comes to languages like C++ or even more modern languages like reversing Go, reversing Rust, there are a few books out there that I've paged through that I've really enjoyed. For C++, none really come to mind outside of the classics like practical malware analysis and reversing, I think, had a section on C++. But for me, when I have run into trouble in understanding those like specific areas of the language, like how to identify templates or multi-inheritance, how to handle those things in disassembly, my best resource that I find are, number one, YouTube videos, not my own in this case, and number two, blogs. Personal blogs of researchers are just, number one, innumerable, which is a blessing and a curse because there's a lot of information out there, some of it dated, some not. But also to me, they're the best way to kind of home in on one particular problem you're trying to look at and solve and see how somebody else actually approached it. So I don't really have like a by name resource to point you to. All I would invite you to try to do is search through, obviously you've probably searched through Google, but search specifically through sites like Medium or other blog sites. And number two, search through GitHub because a lot of people publish material like Markdown blogs or other material to GitHub, and you can find a lot of things in GitHub search. Well, that's not true. GitHub search could use a lot of work actually. But I guess I'd say you'd be surprised by the amount of information and blogs and structured writing that you'd find on there related to these topics that you may not expect on a site like GitHub. So those are a couple places I would look. I feel like that's another cop-out answer, but yeah, for those kind of topics, I usually just dive into somebody who likes nerding out at this stuff like I do and likes to write it down and record it. Yeah, so just to check my math, so to speak, I just Googled C++ reversing templates, and the first, well, I should say from the second up to 6 more entries are personal blogs, and then the first one is actually a black hat white paper called Reversing C++, which is another good resource actually if you're not looking into it. Google Scholar is a good resource, and you can set alerts on that, but even more broadly, look for white papers and academic papers, because there are so many researchers who are in academia or previously in academia who are writing great papers about this stuff. You just have to have the patience, focus, and or Adderall to make your way through the whole paper. Next question or questions from Mohit. I hope I'm saying that right. Question 1, do you plan on tackling more malwares or ransomwares this year, like reverse engineering them from end to end? If yes, please do it unedited raw version, as it then helps me lower my anxiety of watching an expert clicking the right thing every time magically, and also it will help me see the mindset and thought process behind every action you take. Well, let me tell you first, Mohit, there are so many cuts that you don't see of me not clicking the right button the right time, some of which you still do see. So just know that there's no such thing as someone who does it perfectly every time, at least not that I've seen so far. Maybe you all know someone. To your primary question, though, I am definitely open to doing more malware and ransomware stuff. I do have on the list of topics that I keep that has all of your ideas that you've submitted through comments or messages or whatever. I think we had a suggestion last year to do a ransomware sample, and I had a rough draft of what that would look like. Based on some experience I had. So yeah, all that to say that I would love to, if people are interested in that, let me know and I can bump that up the list. I kind of just operate on the list as it comes and as I'm able to like kind of draft out things. So the order at which suggestions are tackled is not always the order they arrive, but yeah, I'd be happy to do that video. That's something I can do. I feel like anytime I can pull out a sample and start walking through that. So yeah, I'll bump that up just based on your feedback, your question there, to something we can maybe tackle this year. Second question, do you work in malware analysis field? Are you aware of any other career paths as well where we can use reverse engineering and be legally employable? I know malware analysis is one such path, but the exhausting part is unnecessary obfuscation. I hear you. I really like to tear things apart, but usually malware authors have a goal to waste analysts' time by obfuscating, packing, encrypting, which then requires some dependency on tool to deobfuscate. In short, I'm really interested in cracking things, peeking inside to know the system or software's mechanism. That's the real fun part, but I want to avoid the jungle of obfuscation. So is there any career like this, or am I cooked? You're not cooked, don't worry. It's funny you talk about the obfuscation, the evasiveness, because I actually just had a great conversation with Dr. Miuyin Yong, who's doing some amazing research. Speaking of white papers, you should go read. I'll try to post some of her work in the description of the video, because we've had a couple of great conversations, and she is one of those researchers, one of the many, who's out there trying to do good work and helping malware analysts and keeping their job easier, and removing that difficulty and that annoyance of the evasiveness. Anyway, that was just on my mind. But to your question, yes, there are other career paths where you can use reverse engineering and you don't have to worry about the malware obfuscation part of it. Although you, depending on where you fall, you kind of always have to deal with like some protections in some way. What I mean by that, so if you look for application security roles, this is a little bit of a mixed bag, because you might still have protections and obfuscation that a company puts in front of their software to protect it from like infringement. But you can legally be paid to black box reverse engineer or clear box reverse engineering their software and look for vulnerabilities. So that's one place my head goes to, is application security or pen testing, red teaming, that kind of thing. You sometimes have those malware, or not malware analysis, reverse engineering problems that you tackle in those fields. The other one that I see that I think would be really fun, but I've not had a role in this, is anti-cheat. So working for game companies, trying to discover vulnerabilities, or when people come out with cheats and hacks for multiplayer or whatever, you go in and try to reverse it and try to figure out how they're exploiting the game, and then you patch it and fix it, maybe put them up on a wall of shame or something. There are actually quite a few open roles that I've seen at the medium to senior level in the anti-cheat realm. They typically want you to have some kind of reversing experience, whether that's malware analysis or just AppSec or something else. prior, but that is a feasible field to get into. I think, I can't say firsthand, but I think there are also some like embedded and hardware systems roles that have to do with reverse engineering technology. Again, in the same vein of like either protecting existing technology or trying to one-up competition or prevent competition from one-upping you. So there are a few different paths, but again, they typically come in the form of intermediate to senior roles because they want you to have worked in some other domain of security or have been reverse engineering somewhere else. So it's a little bit tricky. And yeah, it's an unfortunate reality that there aren't a lot of entry level roles for reversing in those kind of realms. You have to do your time in other places sometimes. Next question from Kabirka, or I hope I'm saying that right. That's the only way I can think of to say that, actually. I have an old C++ game that I really love, which I would be glad to mod in some quality of life features, but there's a problem. Because of my ADHD and impossibility of acquiring proper medications in my country, it's very hard to follow courses, guides as a single person without knowing if it will be a 100% efficient path. Because I just keep jumping from one source of knowledge to the other without really learning anything sufficiently. Private tutors, mentors kind of worked for other fields, but I don't really think I can find the right person for this as the field is quite unique in every program case. I know I'm asking much, but if you would have been me, a professional developer from a completely different field without a proper degree that just wants to do something for himself, how should I go with learning the ways of RE? Wow. First of all, I know I made the joke about Adderall earlier, but believe me when I say that I empathize heavily with those of you who have ADHD and struggle like Kabirka does here. Several people in my circles have ADHD and have to cope with that in cybersecurity and security jobs. And my wife has ADHD and has to deal with it every day in just everyday life. And I really empathize with those that have it because I know just how devastating it can be for when you're just trying to do any simple task, but especially when you're trying to focus and learn something like this, even just something for fun. So first of all, I commend you for just, going after this problem. To your question, it is very difficult, especially without access to medication for me. I can't just recommend that you go read a book about RE or just watch, my 2-hour, 3-hour, 5-hour, 6-hour videos on reverse engineering to go learn this. I think my best advice, and this is coming from somebody who does not have ADHD that I know of, is to learn via the way I talked about a little earlier in the video, which is to practice and start very, 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 very small, especially with your ADHD, starting with a very small issue that you can focus on so that you don't set yourself up with something too large, you get overwhelmed, and then you feel like a failure or you stop trying it because you just can't, you feel like you're not making any progress. So taking the example of the old C++ game, that's awesome that you're looking at that. That's awesome that you're looking to modify it a little bit. I would say before you tackle anything that you'd like to mod, just try to focus on one mechanic of that game and one piece of a mechanic. Like how is the, if it's got a health system, how does the health system work in that? Where does it increment and decrement as the player gets hurt? That's usually somewhere you can kind of home in on. If there are timers involved, how does timer work? How does something like movement work, or how does drawing on the screen work? Those all can become very complex mechanics and topics, but break it down very simply. If you're looking at how things are displayed, well, okay, where can I find all the functions that have to do with displaying stuff? Again, I'm going to reference back to the Rollercoaster Tycoon 2 video just because that's the one that's fresh in my mind of like, we started with just hooking into one of the functions that draws on the screen and then pivoting from there little by little, baby step by baby step into how each region of the screen gets painted on. And then, okay, well, how does it decide what goes where? And you kind of build on that over and over. But the most important thing that you can do is start very, 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 very small with a very small, tangible, constrained objective that you can go in and say, hey, at least I learned this today. And I know it's going to be frustrating because you want to get right to modding. You don't want to spend or waste time as you might perceive it on just looking at mechanics you already know how they work. But I think it is very, very important to the learning process because along the way, like I said, you start recognizing patterns in the gaming code. You start using the flow of the data and the flow of the code to discover things that are completely unrelated to the original problem you're trying to solve. So along with doing that, with solving a very small, tangible objective, take notes. I cannot stress this enough because I do a poor job of it even when I'm recording a video about things. Take notes about every little observation you see. Keep a little scratch pad, whether it's manual. I keep doing this manual or like on your computer. Keep a little scratch pad. Probably easier to do it on the computer because you can copy the addresses and stuff. Of all the little observations you make along the way, even if they turn out to be wrong or misguided or just irrelevant later, keep a scratch pad of everything you've looked at so that you can step away, not get overwhelmed, take a break, come back, and be like, okay, I hit a wall in this one area. I saw this going back. Let me just explore this one thing I saw earlier when I was starting this project. So again, coming from a place where I can't say I've walked in your shoes, I haven't experienced that firsthand, but I empathize heavily with it. That would be my advice. I would encourage anyone else who's here watching who is neurodivergent or has other conditions that impact them in similar ways. If you had tricks that work for you, please let us know in the comments, because I'd also be interested when I'm talking with people who have similar conditions, like what works best for you. Next question from FZX. I gave reverse engineering a shot last year, but every time I open IDA or Ghidra, I just get lost between the dozens and dozens of assembly lines, and I just don't know what to do. What would you recommend as a solution for this issue? And lastly, I'd like to thank you for your wonderful content. Thank you. That means a lot to me. To your question, I feel that every single time I open those two programs too, believe it or not, even if I've been doing it for a while, even if it's on a sample I've been looking at already. Sorry, I might have some weird cuts in this video because I'm using a camera that I don't typically use because I'm on the road and it has a timer I can't override on it, so it stops recording every now and then and I have to cut in the middle of a sentence. So I won't harp on the spiel about starting small and targeted anymore because I've already talked about it, I think, for 2 of these questions, but I would recommend that. Start small and targeted as always. But more importantly to your question is that feeling that you're talking about when you open up and you just get overwhelmed. I get that even when I'm looking at stuff that I've looked at before, if I've analyzed it thoroughly. If I opened up Roller Coaster Tycoon today, I would still have the Ark of the Covenant face-melting feeling if I popped open IDA or Ghidra and started looking at that assembly. Like Perl, the face-melting is a feature of the language itself, not a bug. But along with staying small and targeted, I would also recommend that maybe you don't start in the disassembler. You may notice that in a lot of my workflows, I actually start in the debugger and I start running through the game or the program. I pick a mechanic and I try to pause the debugger at the point that I can start exploring and bouncing around and seeing how things work. And then I'll pivot to the disassembler once I have an idea of where in the disassembly I actually want to target. I rarely start a project in reverse engineering just by popping open the disassembler and just like going ham on it unless I have an idea of where I want to go first. Sometimes that's through the debugger where I'll go in and actually see the code running. Other times I'll look for function names, as you've seen too, that may look familiar, but the most important thing is having a target and not trying to just boil the ocean. Again, I keep saying that phrase. And just trying to read through all that assembly because your brain is not made for that. It's not made to look through assembly. It's made to eat banana, want banana, nom nom banana. So pick your banana first, target the banana, and then go after it. It's very late. I'm sorry that the metaphors are falling flat. As is my bum because I keep slouching and sliding down my chair. Next question from Scooper. I'm a software engineer of about 5 years and I'm sick of it. Relatable. I've been interested in cybersecurity for a long time, and I'm finally putting some serious effort into moving into that industry. Without any certifications, though, how can I make myself a desirable hire, e.g. for pen testing, malware, reverse engineering? Yeah, this is a common question that gets asked. If you look at any of the cybersecurity forums, like there's a lot of people who make the transition one way or the other. They come from IT or software engineering and go to cybersecurity or vice versa. And I think this is a equally, valid question from whatever side you're coming from. Number one, I'll say this. As of the time of this recording, the market is very interesting right now. It is a pretty bad time, and I'm sure you see this in the software engineering realm. It's a pretty bad time for entry-level roles across the board, whether that's in IT, software engineering, or cybersecurity. Particularly in cybersecurity, though, I think it can be very difficult to get your entry-level role if you're, whether that's you coming right from college or you're pivoting from another industry, just because everyone just seems to want to have 5 years of something experience in cybersecurity, but they don't want to train people for whatever reason. Well, we all know the reason. What I would advise you to do is take a look at the openings that are out there. Take a look at the qualifications and see how many you could accomplish without paying out the bum for training or something else that somebody else is not going to pay for. I typically don't recommend people get certifications unless they are the more affordable ones. On that note, if you're really leaning towards red teaming or pen testing, OSCP is still, and OSCE and all that are still kind of the de facto standard for most entry-level roles. CompTIA is meh, but still very desirable for a lot of government roles and entry to mid-level roles there. But in general, without taking into account certifications, if you can build yourself a decent portfolio or a blog or whatever, YouTube channel, whatever, where you can demonstrate like malware reverse engineering skills, I have found, and again, this is my personal experience, so your mileage may vary, most hiring managers worth their salt, at least, who actually understand the domain, will take into account those practical projects a lot more than your experience when they can see you can actually solve the problems that they want their team to be able to solve. So if you're looking to make that transition, what I would say is build up a pretty strong portfolio of, it can be, hobby projects, reverse engineering blogs, whatever. It doesn't have to be the most complex things, but just demonstrate your skill in a particular, language or a particular set of problems you're trying to solve in malware. Write about it, record it, whatever you do best, and put that somewhere where you can advertise it to people so that they can see how you think about reverse engineering problems or pen testing problems or whatever kind of role you're trying to get into, how you go about the workflow, what you learned along the way, and make all of those things very clear so that they can see your mindset. Because when you're going in to hire someone for one of those roles, that's what I really want to see. And I'm not a hiring manager, but I've served on interview panels. What I really look for is, how do you think about problems? Because I don't care if you can solve, a specific coding problem or a leak code problem or whatever. I care that you have the mindset to go be curious, look for answers, and poke at the right things to find the answers, and also communicate with your team members to go solve the issue. So yeah, I can pontificate all I want, but the reality is that it is also just a very tough job market right now. So it's very hard for me to advise on like making that transition. I feel like it'd be disingenuous for me to just tell you to, get a cheap cert or an affordable cert, or put together a portfolio and you'll be golden, because it's really not the case. It really is a lot of luck. It's also a lot of networking. That's the other thing I would throw in here as advice is, just go add people from LinkedIn or reach out to people who you admire or, they work at a place you would like to work to or work at. Pick their brains if they're open to having that conversation. Find good mentors, because in my experience, the people I know have been my greatest asset in finding and pivoting to jobs. That has remained a constant throughout the changing job market, is knowing and broadening your network and being genuinely, open and curious to reaching out to people. I know it doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. It didn't come naturally to me for a long time. But putting yourself out there, asking for advice, or just making connections with people and being like, hey, would you mind if I message you about like this role? Or even reaching out to, recruiters, hiring managers to say, hey, I don't know if I'm ready for the role you posted, but, do you have advice for me? You'd be surprised by the number of people who will take time out of their day to reply to you. The majority of them may not, but you'd be surprised, I think, at the number of people that I've randomly reached out to and asked if I could have like 10 minutes of their time to review my resume or just talk to me about what they would expect for a role. And they were more than happy to not only talk then, but also maintain like a, regular rhythm of conversation. And, we became good colleagues or friends from that. Really enjoyed the Splinter Cell video. I did too, and learned a lot from it. Awesome. Are you planning on making your own game someday? Will you also hack it? All right. So a couple of thoughts. The first thought I have is I'm going back. Okay. Just making sure that I just realized I couldn't remember if I called out the name of the last person, but I did. This one comes from Y30 in Tan, or maybe Yantan, I'm thinking maybe. first of all, really glad you enjoyed that video. I really loved the disassembly in the dark video, and I am planning on doing more. In case that's a question later, I am planning on doing more of those. I actually have, not to derail us too much, a recent development has occurred that has made it possible for the original idea that I scrapped before doing the Splinter Cell video. That original idea, the reason it was scrapped, has potentially been mitigated, surprisingly to me. The timing was amazing. I don't want to say too much about it now because I don't want to shoot myself in the foot. But I am very excited because a recent announcement has possibly made it feasible that I can go back and do the original disassembly in the dark idea I had. So more on that to come. Anyway, I have had a hobbyist dream of making my own game for a long, long time. That's how I got started in programming, was with a program called Alice from Carnegie Mellon. I don't know if you can even still, I'm going to see if you can still find it out there. Oh yeah, you totally can. So Alice was this really quirky but really fun engine, I guess. Software tool is how they describe it. It's like block-based programming, and that was like my first real exposure to like building stuff with programming languages. I love that tool when I was first like trying to dip my toes into programming, and that kind of like generated my initial desire to like build games and 3D stuff. And as I mentioned in the 2024 video, I actually started doing a bunch of Unreal and Unity courses. I've not done a lesson in those courses for quite a while. I just haven't had a lot of time. But yeah, I would really like to call it like a little aspiration of mine to make like even a tiny game at some point. I actually have a grand idea, a storyline in my head, but I don't want to make the mistake that every game developer or indie game developer will tell you, is don't start with like your big dream game idea. Start with like something super small, otherwise get overwhelmed. Going back to a theme that has happened throughout this video. Yeah, I'm not really in a good place like in my life right now with the little ones to like dedicate to building games right now, but yeah, one day I definitely want to make something. Even if it's not something I release, I want to put together like a full-blown game. Yeah, always happy to talk about video game dev stuff. I love hearing people's ideas, and I'm really happy with how accessible that indie game development has become. As far as will I hack it, bro, I'll be surprised if I even can program it properly. My hacking it will be actually making the thing to make it actually function and work properly. All right, just looking ahead, we have a couple questions left, but some of them are like related. I think you can fold them into each other. So I'm going to do this kind of off topic one first, and then I'll get to the last couple that I'll try to tackle all at the same time. Anonymous asks, favorite meal, dessert, or treat? That's a very difficult one because that's like three different, well, I guess dessert and treat maybe this. No, I'd say that's three different, very different like favorites there. I'll just say this. I enjoy everything my wife bakes, because she's an amazing baker, and I'm not just saying that because she might watch this. She really is incredible. You can ask anyone who knows us. That's what they know her for, aside from being amazing in every other way as well. I'll say in general, my favorite kinds of desserts, I think about like Nickelodeon. God, I'm so tired. I would say what comes to mind in general is like when my wife makes her version of brownies that are just like ooey gooey in the middle. Just like my favorite things, my favorite desserts or treats are, well, they're like the YouTube video ideas I have. They're just ever so slightly baked, but enough that they're just like, that's good junk food. Meals and treats, I feel like you could go 1,000 different directions depending on what kind of mood I'm in. All right, for these last few questions, I'm going to try to blend them together because I think they are somewhat similar, and I think I can answer them kind of all together. We already touched on some of these too, I think. So first one from Bang Bang Bangarang, nice name. How did you get into malware analysis? I'm so sorry. This is so disgusting. How did you get into malware analysis or cyber? Do you have advice for people looking for this kind of role? And then if I pivot over to a couple of comments on the actual community post I made about the question box, Cyber Tinsel. I know this person too, so I know they are really going to enjoy what I just almost said. I almost said cyber incel, cyber tinsel. Sorry. asked, what would be your recommendation to people who are curious about cybersecurity but don't really have a background in it? And what are some other games you're considering for your Disassembly in the Dark series? So I'm going to touch on the Disassembly in the Dark series first. Already hinted at it. The one I have in mind. I don't want to say too much again because I don't want to disappoint if it doesn't work out. But I do have a couple of other games in mind. They are both older games. I just like working with older games. They're a little bit easier to work with, looser on the whole legalities around reverse engineering as well. But older, like favorite, like gold status, S status video games that I have in the basement, similar to what happened with Roller Coaster Tycoon, that I would love to do a Disassembly in the Dark series for. Yeah, I'm afraid of saying too much because I don't want you all to be disappointed if we don't end up doing it, if it's not feasible for some reason, as I found out last time. So I'll just say that I'm considering some more of the kind of retro but kind of modern retro games for that. And yeah, to the recommendation to people who are curious about cybersecurity and don't have a background in it, I know we talked about that a little bit with the earlier question about breaking into the field. Also, how did you get into malware analysis or cyber? Do you have advice for people looking for this kind of role? So let me do this. I'm going to tell you all, I'm going to bore you all with my path into the field and then talk about why that path is probably not going to work for you. And then tell you, good luck, babe. No, I will give you the context of like my path and then talk about kind of why that path is not necessarily feasible today and what I would recommend just based on what I see from my own perspective, and keeping in mind that's a very small perspective of the entire world. So my crooked path began in university. I talked about it in our XP Solitaire video with Fake Brian. I talked about that course I took where I just got lucky in that. Well, actually, let me back up even more. When I entered college, I was a criminal justice major. So there's the first crook of the path. I don't remember if I elected to do that first because I was torn between the two. I liked the detective work of the criminal justice part of the forensics work, but I liked the computer science. I thought, to this day, I thought I put down computer science as my preferred major and ended up in criminal justice. So I must have like either decided criminal justice or accidentally bubbled the wrong bubble above computer science or below computer science to criminal justice. Either way, I moved from criminal justice to an intro programming class in college in my sophomore year. And then during that whole rest of that year, once I changed my major and everything, I was dead set on becoming just like a typical full stack developer. It wasn't until I had an internship opportunity for a developer role fall through because of funding that a mentor of mine and a professor of sorts at the time came to me and had a different internship available that same summer at Cyber Command, which was a very new thing at Fort Belvoir for the Army. And they're like, hey, do you want to go do like hacking type stuff? And I said, heck yeah, I do, if they'll pay for it. And I did. And I immediately got bit by the bug working on that little 1 month long internship. Super lucky, by the way, to even get to go do that thing. A very rare kind of deal. That's going to be a pattern, you'll see. And then as soon as I got back from that internship, I changed all my courses for the next semester to just like focus on security, which was not that many courses at the time. I talked about that in the XP video. It's like I got super lucky that we had a adjunct professor, I think is the right verbiage, a temporary professor who was there for just a couple years, if I remember, that Brian, who I do know his last name. Somebody commented with his last name and I've already forgotten it again. I feel so bad. But I was so lucky that he was doing that course that semester because I don't think it lasted. I don't think the course was there for very long. And it was one of very few cybersecurity focused courses. Nowadays, the same university has a whole program and a whole track for cybersecurity. So it just blew up after that. But when I was going through school and university, it wasn't just like a path that you took typically. So I did, my last couple of years in uni, I focused on that. I came out of uni, I went to the Army, I went to signal school, which at the time I couldn't get into cyber because the Army wasn't commissioning people into cyber, at least not from the Guard yet. And so I did Signal, which was a lot more like the networking radio type of things, but Signal School gave me Network Plus and Security Plus off the bat. So 2 certifications paid for by Uncle Sam. again, set me up for success later, not an opportunity everybody gets. I come back from signal school looking for my first full-time civilian job, and I was lucky enough that we had a family friend who was a technical recruiter. Again, you're starting to see a pattern here. Not something everybody has access to. I'm super privileged and lucky. I'm not saying I didn't work hard, because I did during school. I sacrificed a lot to, keep my grades up and everything, but that's not the full story. Anyway, we knew a tech recruiter. He gave me a couple roles. I was dead set almost. Like, I was about to call back to accept a software engineering role that was kind of security oriented. And then I got a call for a contracting gig that, the role itself didn't sound like as impressive, I guess, as the software engineering gig. But they invited me just to come by for a day, spend a day with their team, and just see what work they do. And I thought that was really awesome at the time. No one had ever done that for me as part of an interview process. And I went and I fell in love with this team. And I stayed with that team from contracting with them to going full-time with them a few months later. I stayed with them for 8 years up till last year. That's how much I loved the people that were part of that team. And I loved the work. A lot of my experience there, I started out doing incident response kind of work, phishing, analysis type of work, building little tools that would help us along the way. When I went full-time, I pivoted into cyber threat intelligence, which is where I gained a lot of experience doing reverse engineering of malware. Also just like writing reports, reading reports, tracking down threat actors, all that fun stuff that you get in the field. To me, like the most fun part of my career. And then, ascended through that kind of ladder and did, kind of worked my way towards more of the strategy and automation part of that. So I kind of came back to engineering, and that's where I am now. Is I'm actually transitioned roles to a different gig, and I'm doing a lot more of the detection engineering and software engineering side of that now. So I don't get to play with malware every day, except for like the side work I do with RatKing Parser and some of the other projects. But I really enjoy what I do. And I'm leaving out the whole part-time gig I had with the Army, where I eventually did transition to cyber in the Army. And I got to do a bunch of great, cool stuff with them too, a lot of which I can't talk about, but got exposed to so many different, domains of cyber that I just, I feel so lucky to have been exposed to all these different teams and all these different experiences that, again, not a lot of people get access to, especially now that the field has become more saturated. It's hard to even get a good cybersecurity internship, I feel like, at least from the feedback I'm seeing from all of you and from Reddit and from other forums where people are posting about the job search. Even my friends who were laid off, after COVID and in the last year, even as people have cut staff, I have friends who have been in the field longer than I have, way longer than I have, way more experience, way smarter people than I am, who have struggled for months to find work, and they have experience. So I tell you this long tale and talk to you about my experience and the experience of these people because, again, I feel it's disingenuous for me to give you advice in a completely different time than when I came into the field and completely different circumstances than the luck and privilege I had coming into the field. So to those of you entering the market today, whether you're transitioning from another field or coming out of school, it's very difficult for me to be in your shoes and to give you good advice right now. It's just a very volatile market, a volatile world we find ourselves in. But what I would say is don't lose hope. Number one, don't give up on yourself, even when it seems very dismal. It's of course a good idea to have backup plans. If you can't find an immediate role, if you're constrained in some way to looking in a certain location and you can't find a role there, obviously look for other options just in the meantime to keep you on your feet so you don't just waste away to ruin while you're trying to find the right role for you. But don't give up on yourself. Don't lose hope that you're not going to find any role in cybersecurity because it is possible. Like I said earlier, it's important to have a good portfolio. It's important to show and demonstrate to people that beyond your resume that you can actually solve problems. So be sure you're keeping on top of other people's blogs, the white papers that are coming out, the new research, the new technologies. I know it's just overwhelming because there's so many different ways you could focus your time. And typically the advice I give people is to build breadth in the start of your career, not depth. Don't try to pigeonhole yourself into something too soon and really try to take in all the different roles that you could get your foot in the door in. If you can't find a malware analysis role, try to find a SOC analyst role or something similar that you can maybe pivot to that once you demonstrate the value in that role of your malware analysis skills. Find places that will train you. Again, I know I'm saying it like you have, that you don't have to, or that you're the one being picky, which is not the case always or ever. But look for companies, if you're lucky enough to have this flexibility, look for companies that will pay for training that, even if it's not directly related to your role, is security related. So like if you're just a SOC analyst or a threat intelligence analyst, you can still go take a SANS course or something once a year to go expand your skills or practice your skills, or a company or organization that gives you the time to experiment and test out different skills and try new things to solve problems. Number one, that's a sign of a healthy organization anyway. And number two, it speaks a lot about how they will care for you throughout your career if they give you that time or that training to better yourself. Last thing I'll say about this is also be critical of the voices you're listening to as you're starting out and learning things and getting a feel for things. Have some critical thinking, some media literacy, some thought put into where you invest your focus. And what I mean by that is, number one, don't get so tied into the doom and gloom of a lot of the, I see a lot of subreddits of starting out in computer science or cybersecurity that are all doom and gloom right now. Somewhat for good reason. The market is rough, but don't be convinced that you should just give up off the bat. Don't give up hope just because you're hearing from an echo chamber like that. Take into consideration where those messages are coming from and what the actual substance of the source of the doom and gloom is. Second thing, and I'm reminded of a Reddit thread that came up a couple months ago that I was talking about in some of my circles about cybersecurity influencers. What was it? I need to find it again. Oh, wow. Actually, the original post is deleted, but the comments are still visible. It was, who are the cybersecurity influencers that exaggerate their credibility? And I'm not going to drag on anyone in the thread, although I have thoughts. Believe me, I looked through it. I have thoughts. My first thought is, thank you for not putting me on the list. Second of all, some of those things I agree, some of the names on there I agree with, some not. But the important thing to understand is I saw this towards the bottom of that thread. The important thing to understand is don't always assume one way or the other. A lot of people assume some influencers, as we call them, are snake oil salesmen because of whatever their messaging coming out. And sure, some of them are sketchy, and I would argue that they are actively hurting people coming into the business with some of their messaging. But a lot of so-called influencers, the major complaint is that they're just they're surface level, they're shallow, they're not getting into the deep stuff. They don't actually know what they're talking about. And I think it's important to remember that people who elect to go down that path, who are really dedicated to the dream of reaching a broad audience, typically have to keep things at the surface level to broaden their reach. They're not going to get a bunch of viewers for very deep topics typically when they can just explain something like ELI5, some concept that you may have heard 100 times if you're breaking into the field or have been in the field for a while. When I had my old channel, when I was a 15-year-old Let's Player trying to make it big on YouTube, when that was actually my dream, it was a lot of the same. I would curate my content and grind to try to please the biggest population I could so that I could pump those numbers up. And I can't necessarily fault anyone for trying to do that when they're trying to make a livelihood. But all this to say, be selective in who you're learning from, what kind of content you're consuming. Make sure you're doing your due diligence to check what other people are saying, especially people in the field, about different sources of information, different courses that are out there, because there are just so many courses and certifications and other channels and everything that claim to be able to get you a job quick and are more than happy to take your money and your time and your energy and just aren't worth their salt or just not putting out the right messaging. Again, I'm not going to drag anyone through the coals because I'm certainly not the best source of information for learning stuff, but my dream and my goal is not to be an influencer. I've said it before. I said it in my first video for the channel. And when I talk about my old channel, that was the dream for 15-year-old Jeff. For 30-something Jeff, my dream is what I'm doing right now. It's engaging with other nerds who are passionate about cybersecurity and reverse engineering malware in games, and just have fun doing silly, stupid stuff with computers. That's really what I'm here for. And that's why I don't care about you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I love you and I need you. That's why I don't care about, subscriber count or analytics or anything. I don't pay attention to my creator dashboard anymore. And maybe to the chagrin of you, I don't put a lot of weight on my uploading schedule for this reason, because I made it clear from the start, at least I tried to with my audience, that I'm not here to grind out content, every week. I wish I could do that still, but it's just not where I am. I have a full-time job doing this stuff, and my goal is to just enjoy this, put out stuff that's fun and quality when I can, and not try to grind out stuff that's going to be less than stellar quality. I know we started here and ended here, but this was also supposed to be a video with my thoughts on 2025 and my plan for the channel, and that's kind of it. Like, I don't, last year I feel like I had kind of a set list of things I wanted to do, and I didn't really come close to doing everything I wanted to do, and I just want to kind of stop putting that pressure on myself when I have the life that I have to accomplish so many things. So like, my only promise to you, and hopefully it's enough to keep you around, is that, I may not upload every week or even every month. I'm hoping to do even once a quarter would be nice for me. But when I do upload, it's going to be quality, it's going to be fun, and it's going to be something I'm proud of. And if it's not those things, then time may go by where there's not an upload here for a while, but I'm happy to say that the majority of people who have reached out to me through this channel understand that, and that's why we have such a great community we do here today. So in closing, here's to 2025. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for everything from 2024 and before, and what will happen this year, and just for being here and for chatting with me. These days, like I said, I'm not focused on quantity of views or analytics or anything like that. I'm focused on quality of interactions, and this video is like the peak of that. I feel so fulfilled having gotten so many good questions from you all and being able to converse with you like this. So let me know if you'd like to do something similar again soon. Otherwise, yeah, I've got a few ideas cooking for Disassembly in the Dark, hoping to do more structured stuff too. But as far as timelines, I don't want to say anything because I'm not sure when those things will be uploaded. But when they do get uploaded, I will promise that they will be a lot of fun, and we'll all learn something and have something to talk about in the comments or on Blue Sky or on LinkedIn or wherever else you want to converse and chat with me. All right. Wow. That was a long question box video. I did not expect it to go this long, but I'm just having so much fun, and I hope it was worthwhile for you too. Thank you so much again for everything you all do. I wish you all the best this year. Truly, I wish you all the best, no matter where you find yourself this year. Again, don't give up hope. There's always opportunities tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and I'm here with you through all of it. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks for being here. Thanks for liking and sharing and subscribing and all that good stuff. Most importantly, thanks for being you. Thanks for being curious. Thanks for being critical. See you soon.